Welcome into another edition of the Hops and Spirits podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Green, and we will have Derek DeFranco here with us in a second. Well, he's kind of here already, but we'll be talking to him in a second. Don't forget to check out some of our past episodes. We had a fun January. We did our very first flight night with Barrel Bourbon, and we had our very first Under the Influence Roundtable series where we talked all things beer with none other than Brian Roth, editor and writer at Good Beer Hunting, Neil Whitty, Master Cicerone, owner, founder of Tabstar Craft Quality Solutions, and Kinsey Bernhard, host of Boys Are From Mars and podcasts, writer for PorchDrinking.com, and a bartender here in Kentucky as well. A lot of fun stuff happening in January, and now we're kind of kicking it into a different kind of gear with February, Flavorful February. We got a great lineup. Not only are we talking with Derek, but we're going to have Starlight Distillery's Christian Huber on to talk how whiskey gets its flavor. We'll talk unique recipes to make some wild whiskeys with the boys from Foundry Distillery, and we'll close out the month with another flight night, but this time on the beer side of things. But now we're joined by Derek DeFranco, owner and head brewer of Mirror Twin. And Derek, welcome back because you were my very first guest.
Yeah, it was an honor, and it's an honor to be back.
Well, I really appreciate it. And we'll be talking kind of how you guys make wild beers. And when I say wild beers, you guys do some different things. You do cereal beers, you do Girl Scout cookie beers, all sorts of different kinds of styles. So we'll kind of talk about how that process works. But I like to start off everything nowadays with one tough question. Sometimes it is tough, sometimes not so much. But for you, since Mirror Twin has none other than Rolling Oven and it's two breweries or two buildings, I figured I'd ask you the tough question. What's your favorite pizza?
uh, that is a tough question because all pizza is just so good, but I would say the one that I have the most is the buffalo chicken without banana peppers
Mhm.
because it's not that I don't like banana peppers. It's just on a pizza, it's not my favorite. But the focaccia is really good too. Just a olive oil base and fresh mozzarella. You can't beat that.
I was gonna say I know I'm always a sucker for a good pepperoni pizza too, so I can never go wrong there with their many choices, and I just love pizza. It's the perfect combination of pizza and beer. So,
Yeah,
and it
I
works
mean,
perfectly at Mirror Twin too.
coffee and donuts move aside. All right, pizza and beer is the new pairing.
Exactly. Although you guys do some beer and donuts too, right? If I'm not mistaken.
We've done that. Yep.
So now to kind of get into this flavorful February, you guys make crazy beers, but just to simplify it, how does just making beer in general go? Because I've done it once on the brew side, made an entire mess, um, but I'm sure you guys have it down to a little bit more of a science.
No, we're still winging it. So the basic premise, the process is we take malted barley, we mill it. We've got so the basic premise, the process is we take malted barley, we mill it. We've got the shell crushed and the inside exposed. We call it the endosperm, and we mix it with hot water, and we call that process the mash. It's very similar to like whiskey. It's just the ingredients are different. So we let the now milled grain sit with hot water for about an hour. Um, Enzymes that were created in the malting process start to break down the starches into simple sugars. So we call that the saccharification rest. We let it sit for an hour, then we separate the liquid from the grain. And as we're doing that, we'll spray it with hot water
Mhm.
to rinse as much sugar out of the grain as we can. The more sugar we can get from the grain, the less grain we have to use per batch. And when you brew professionally, that becomes really important because every dollar counts. So we transfer that over to our boil kettle. We boil it for an hour. We add hops to that process. And depending on the style of beer, we'll add hops either at the beginning of the boil all the way through the 60 minutes of the boil. Then we'll let that rest for a little bit, and then we will pump it out of the kettle through what's called a heat exchanger. It cools it very quickly into our fermenters. We'll add yeast, and let the yeast kind of do the work from there. The yeast will start to consume those simple sugars and create ethanol and carbon dioxide as a byproduct. That process takes about 7 to 10 days, and then the complete process takes just on average about 2 weeks. Once the beer is done, we'll taste test it, make sure that it doesn't have any flavors that we don't want, make sure that it's fermented out perfectly. We will take a reading of how much sugar it started with and then how much sugar it ends with. From there, we will drop the temperature of the tanks to about 33, 31 degrees, and then we will carbonate it. And we'll test it, make sure the carbonation is at the level we want, and then we'll package it. And from there, it either goes on tap or into a can or to a restaurant or bar.
And I was going to say, as you talk there, I was going to say, as you talk there, to me, there's a lot more science that goes into beer or whiskey, any type of alcohol, really, than I think most people think. Because you have to watch as you go, because it can go a little haywire, I'm guessing, at times.
Yeah, it's not an exact science. I mean, one of the things that really drew me to brewing in the first place is that it's a really good balance between science and art. Mm-hmm. The science obviously is a lot of biology and chemistry. And the art is kind of knowing when to add certain ingredients, knowing what ingredients will work well together, and knowing how to troubleshoot issues when they do arise. And it's not a perfect science. It sometimes things do go haywire. And luckily, a lot of that is controlled through good process. And we do kind of have it down to a science where it's been a long time since we've had to dump a beer down the drain. And that does happen. But it's really just controlling the basis of it, the most basic things that you do to make sure that every batch turns out the way you want it is sanitation, making sure everything's sanitized from the time it comes out of the kettle to the time it goes into the fermenter and thereon. And then controlling the fermentation temperature, which is a lot easier when you're a professional brewer because you have very expensive systems that do that for you. As a home brewer, it's a lot more difficult because a lot of people don't have access to those. Mm-hmm. And the final thing is just making sure that the yeast is healthy and ready to do the job. And if you can control those three things, then you can make sure that you're not going to have a lot of issues or have it to dump a beer down the drain.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm sure that's not a fun day around the brewery when that happens, because there's a lot of time and effort that goes into it.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of times you don't know that it needs to be dumped until all that time and effort has been spent. So, and you know, it's. I think every brewer loves what they do and the product that they craft, and to have to pour down the drain is always not pleasurable. But I would rather dump a beer down the drain than serve a bad beer to our customers.
Well, absolutely, because I mean the goal is obviously to make things consistent, so they know what they're always going to get, and then make sure it's of high quality if it's kind of a special one-off, so they keep coming back. Now, one thing I find interesting, I'm a big fan of sour beers, or even fruited beers. How does that process work? Because obviously you're adding something maybe a little different than you normally would, and actual fruit into the process, which can cause that's got its own side of alcohol and sugars that come about it. So how does that process work when you're trying to make those fruited beers, sour beers, or any beer that kind of has a fruit base in it?
So for a while when we opened, we didn't do a whole lot of sours. And the reason for that is because the best way to do sours like that is what we call a kettle sour. And when we started on our 3-barrel system, they're just we were having a hard time keeping up with just the normal beers that we. And when you make a sour like that, you are basically um, holding up your kettle for several days. So
Mhm.
then when we upgraded our system about 2 years ago, it's been a little bit more than that. We were now had the capacity to start making them. So we most brewers do this when it comes to these style of beers. It's called a kettle sour. So what we'll do is we go through the process. We make that wort, which is what the liquid is called before it's beer, and we will inoculate it with bacteria. And the bacteria will produce primarily lactic acid, and that's what gives it that sour tart flavor. That process takes 24, 48 hours, sometimes a little bit longer, depending on what strain of bacteria that you use. But it needs to be kept at a pretty warm temperature because that's the bacteria like that temperature. That's why we do it in the kettle.
Mm-hmm.
The other reason is because bacteria is not something you want in what we call clean beers. Like our blonde ales, red ales. We don't want any bacteria in that beer because it spoils it. It makes it sour. So putting bacteria in your fermenter after fermentation is always kind of a scary situation because if any of that bacteria lingers on a gasket or what we call a dark side in the tank where the cleaning process may not get to it, then you might have beers that are supposed to be clean that turn into sours, and you don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
So doing it in the kettle allows us to inoculate the sour in the kettle, let it get to the pH we want, and then we can boil it and basically kill that bacteria before it goes into our fermenter, kind of dodging that situation of having to deal with live bacteria in a tank. Now, that's not to say that we haven't had beers sour in tanks, but then cleaning those tanks, you just are very thorough. You pull every piece and part. You don't want to have to do that every single time you clean a tank.
Yeah.
Because there are gaskets that you just hold all the parts together, and you don't really need to disassemble them every single time. They get cleaned normally through what we call the CIP process, the clean in place process that we use to clean all of our tanks. So that's how we sour the beer. That's how we get that tart flavor in there. And then when we add the fruit, the difficulty, like you said, is fruit has fermentable sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to balance adding, like, when you're going to add the fruit, because if you add it right from the beginning, what's going to happen is that yeast is just going to ferment the sugars that make the fruit sweet. And so instead of getting this nice fruit flavor, you're just going to get this really harsh alcohol flavor. So when we first started doing our sours, we added the fruit all during what we call the cold side process. So after the tank had what we call cold crashed, been down to 30 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that is if you don't ferment any of the sugars and you package that product, and cans is where you see the issue. And someone takes that beer home and they let it get warm. If there's any living yeast still in the beer, which we don't pasteurize, and so it will start to re-ferment, and you can get the gushers. And we've had it happen to us, and it's something it's not something we want to happen. And obviously, we don't. It's not our goal to make a unshelf stable product, but
Mm-hmm.
you still want to get that fruit flavor. So what we've started to do is add the fruit. We'll add half of it during active fermentation, about a couple days before the end. So the yeast will kind of ferment out those sugars, and since they're so simple, it kind of like tuckers the yeast out. So they basically go dormant and settle out. And then we'll add the rest of the fruit after it's cold crash. And we found that doing that really helps to prevent that re-fermentation. Now, the big question is, like, in what way do we get our fruit? And obviously, one way is to get whole fruit and then kind of process it into a puree ourselves, which would probably be cheaper, but so time consuming that it wouldn't really be cheap. It
Yeah,
wouldn't
in the
be
long
cheaper.
run.
So
Yeah.
the way we buy almost all of our fruit that goes into those sours is in a puree form. And there are several companies, I mean, probably more than I even know, that's all they do is make these fruit purees. So, and
Interesting.
they're aseptic. They come in, like aseptic bags. And
Hmm.
we just either will dump them directly into the tank, or we have these kegs. We kind of call them brinks. A lot of times we use them to harvest and reuse our yeast, but there's a 4-inch port on the top that we can take off and put back on. So we'll add the fruit into there and then pump it into our tanks with CO2.
And then you kind of talked about kind of the kettle side of things. Do sours take a little bit longer for every bit of the process in terms of letting it have to sit and so forth, so it's not maybe as quick of a turnaround and it ties up a little bit of equipment for a bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I mentioned earlier when it came to our 3-barrel system, which is why it was so hard for us to make kettle sours on that
Hmm.
small system. So
Gotcha.
it ties up the kettle for 24 to 48 hours. So it is something that takes a little bit more time and planning than normal beers, but it's definitely worth it. It's something that people really like, and kind of why we do the crazy fun beers is because we we aim to make our customers happy. We want to make the beers that people want to drink, and sometimes as brewers we can be kind of stubborn and stick to the styles that are classic. But to me, the evolution of what beer is the fun part about being a brewer, and throwing a bunch of donuts or Reese's peanut butter cups in beer is a pain in the butt, but is the fun part.
I was gonna say how did you guys come up with, because one of the most recent ones you did that to me was wild was the pastry stout, where you literally worked with one of the local donut shops in Lexington. And did you guys just literally dump donuts into the beer? Is that kind of how it worked? I mean, I know it's probably a little more than that, but is that the gist?
No, that's it. That's basically it. Uh, we so we made this base imperial milk stout that we knew we were going to basically turn into several different variations of pastry stouts, because that's kind of people really like that style of beer now. So we made this imperial milk stout. It was 8.8% is how it turned out, and we have this tank that we bought specifically for doing stuff like this, and it's about 3.5 barrels, which is about 120 gallons, and it has a lid that we can completely take off.
Okay.
And it's most of our fermenters have a manway door. Once there's liquid in there, you can't open it, or you're gonna have a bad time if you do.
Hmm.
Uh, so that allows us to add ingredients like this. So the way we do it, and we have a really good relationship with Spalding's Donuts. They're right behind us,
Hmm.
and one of the workers there every Friday will. He didn't do this during the pandemic, obviously, but for the longest time, and he just recently started resuming when we were able to open back up to the public. But he brings us all the donuts they don't sell, which I think is a testament to how awesome Spalding's is, because they make everything fresh every day, and if they don't sell it all, they just give it away.
Hmm.
Because they would rather just give those donuts away than sell a product that is inferior, and we understand that because that's how we feel about our beer. So he brought us, what was it? It was a little over 100 donuts, and we decided to do a mixture between chocolate covered donuts, the cinnamon twist ones, and just regular glazed. And so we buy these. They're like strainer bags.
Okay.
And we basically just sat there and tore all the donuts up into pieces and put them in these strainer bags, tied the bags closed, and then just threw them in the tank.
And then you have a beer.
And then the beer will start to kind of soak up the flavor of the donuts. And there are ways you could mimic the flavor of donuts without actually having to use donuts. But I think a lot of times if you do things like that, where you're using like natural or artificial extracts, it can come off as really artificial and just it doesn't taste as good. So a lot of times we use the real ingredients, and I think you just get a level of complexity from that you can't get from just trying to mimic it with extracts.
I was gonna say, I mean, is that when it comes to some of your other interesting ideas? I think when they're either last fall or whenever or whenever Girl Scout cookies come out, you guys did some Girl Scout beers. You've done cereal beers. Is that kind of the philosophy behind it? Is actually go get those actual ingredients and find a way to infuse them into the process?
Yeah, and the fun thing is when you go to Costco and you're buying 40 boxes of Cinnamon Toast Crunch cereal, the looks people give you. Like, man, that guy really likes Cinnamon Toast Crunch. He probably should be in therapy. But yeah, we take actual ingredients and infuse them into the beer. And that's why a lot of times those releases, especially the Mirror Mondays, are so limited because the actual process of adding those into the beer is just difficult sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And so scaling that up into a much larger size is sometimes just too difficult for us to do with the equipment we have. And so that's why we do such small batches. Also, when you're doing things like that, it's kind of a shot in the dark,
mm-hmm.
and you'd rather not, ruin how many gallons of beer before you kind of test it out. And that's kind of what the Mirror Monday is. Obviously it's our way of being able to experiment and do crazy things, but it's also kind of a, hey, let's see how this turns out in one keg. And if it goes well, we can extrapolate everything into a larger batch. But if it stinks, I would much rather dump one keg of beer down the drain than a lot.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a smart business decision there. Like when you're putting that stuff in, whether it's Girl Scout cookies, you kind of talked about it a little bit with the donuts. Is it in that kind of strainer bag, or sometimes is it thrown into the mash or kind of whatever stage it is? Like, because I know you guys do like Reese's and different things as well. Like, how do you guys do the strainer bags, or do you throw them in the process?
So there are a couple times where we've done things like that, like with pumpkin puree, for instance, when we add it to the mash. But a lot of times, either the temperature of the mash, which is anywhere between 140 and 156 degrees, will kind of denature anything that, the flavor that we get out of it. So most of the time, I would say probably 95% of the time, we're adding the fun stuff, the donuts, the Reese's, the cereals in the cold side part of it, because that's when the beer is really going to take up most of the flavor without denaturing a lot of things that you wouldn't even see the flavor in the final product without having to either, like I said, kind of use extracts or adding those ingredients all in secondary fermentation.
Gotcha.
So most of the time we use the strainer bags.
Okay, because I was curious. I was like, how do you get that out? If you're dumping you're dumping 40 boxes of Cinnamon Toast Crunch in there, how do you get that out without kind of going with the beer?
So we just reach our hand into the keg and just pull the whole bag out. In the tanks, when we make the really big batches, sometimes we'll just take like they make these strings that are basically not aseptic. They don't come that way, but you can sanitize them, and so we'll use those and kind of tie them off to something so we can fish the bags out. But yeah, that's pretty much how we do it. It's
All right, so
it's it's very crude. I mean, sometimes we're like halfway in the tank, someone's holding our legs on a ladder. So
I was
it's
gonna say, I'm sure that would be a sight to see, but in reality, though, it's almost like a tea bag, like because you can
yeah,
pull it back out and it gives it the flavor.
exactly. I mean, that is 100% in essence what it's like. And the thing that's amazed us, even through the process, is how much of the flavor actually comes through on the final product.
Mhm. No, I was gonna say I can attest to that. Having some of the different beers, you really do feel like you're tasting, a cinnamon toast crunch. I mean, I mean, you're not biting down on it, so to speak, but you do get those notes in there, and that to me is amazing. What are some of the more fun you've had with the styles that you've created? Because not everyone obviously is like me that's been able to go to Mirror Twin and try them out. That's listening or watching. So, what are some of the fun ones that you guys have done? We've talked about the donut beer that you just recently did, cereal beers. What kind of cereal beers did you all end up doing?
So the cereal beers are kind of where the craziness started. And that is kind of a funny story because when I was a home brewer, I love Cinnamon Toast Crunch. It's one of my favorite cereals. And I made, I ended up making a brown ale, which eventually was kind of the catalyst to everything that tasted like Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And the way I did that was I kind of, had this blend of like cinnamon and vanilla. And one day we were all sitting and talking about the Mirror Monday stuff and kind of how we could expand on it. And we started joking about how there's a day for everything. Like
Hmm.
it's, National Blue Paint Day. And so it just so happened that in a couple weeks it was National Cereal Day. And we started talking about how when I was a home brewer, I made a beer that tasted like Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And it just kind of naturally became this, well, let's take, 5 or 6 of our beers, infuse them with cereal and see what happens. And so that's kind of what started all the crazy fun stuff. And the fun part was figuring out what beers were going to pair with what cereals. So obviously we knew Cinnamon Toast Crunch worked really well in the brown ale. And then it was okay, well, our wit beer, our wheat ale has this kind of nice orange flavor to it. It would probably pair really well with something like Trix or something fruity, or the blonde ale, which is kind of just a very light beer. So it would kind of just be susceptible to take on kind of any flavor. And my second favorite cereal is Honey Bunches of Oats, and so we chose that one. And then obviously things that had like a really good chocolate note to them, like Cocoa Puffs, is going to be good in a porter or a stout.
Hmm.
And so that's we sat around and every year we try to do we do the repeatable ones like the Cinnamon Toast Crunch because it's a fan favorite. And then also we try to pick a different cereal every year with a different beer.
And then I was gonna say, I mean, you've done other things. Is there anything that's like off limits in terms of your creativity when it comes to trying these wild styles or these wild infusions?
Um, not not really. Obviously, illegal ingredients are off limits, so no
Yeah.
drugs. But outside of that, I mean, there's not really. I mean, we so I'm what is technically called the head brewer,
Hmm.
and I have 2 assistant brewers, and all of us just kind of enjoy the fun of adding those ingredients to beers. And so, I mean, we've done Pixie Sticks. We've done Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. We've done Skittles. Starburst, by and far away, was the most pain in the butt thing we've ever done because we bought them and we thought it was going to be like a bulk situation. Nope. They were all individually wrapped. So we just sat in the tap room just unwrapping hundreds of Starbursts. it was my fingers hurt at the end of the day.
I was gonna say that was probably a very long day at the brewery.
It wasn't my favorite. Let's just put it that way. Also, my laptop battery is about to die, so I need to text my brewer to bring my charger over real quick. So I apologize.
No worries. I was gonna say, are you ever going to do the Starburst again, or are you going to try to figure out a way to make sure you're not unwrapping every single individual?
Definitely. So we'll do it again for sure because it tasted great, but we will not do it unless I can find a way to find Starbursts that aren't individually wrapped.
All right. So before I let you go, Derek, my last question is: do you guys have anything fun coming up on these crazy wild beers? I mean, I'm guessing you have to, since one, you do Mirror Monday every Monday, but I'm guessing you've got some fun things in the hopper.
So there's two really fun things coming up. Obviously, the Mirror Mondays, there's always something new coming out. But for Valentine's Day, the Monday, I guess, after, we're doing like a Valentine's Day Mirror Twin Tap Takeover, where we're infusing beer with some chocolates and things that are pretty custom for Valentine's Day celebrations. So that'll be really fun. And then on top of that, banana is like one of my favorite flavors. The problem is a lot of times banana can come off really artificial if you don't use something that's real banana. So we bought this banana fruit puree from one of the companies that we normally use. And when we got it, there were stickers on the containers that said, "This is not for use in beverages."
That's great to know.
So,
after the fact.
obviously the company came and picked it up and refunded us the money. But so we were like, man, like I guess we tried to find banana puree in other sources, but we just were not having any luck, and so we kind of just were like, all right, banana I guess just isn't something we'll try. We've used like the chips, but it takes so many to get any flavor that it's just not worth it. So we were at Urban Artifact because one of the things I had mentioned was that brewers like to visit other brewers. We nerd out on brewing, and there's just this really fun connection that brewers have with each other, craft brewers in particular, because we've all gone through the same struggles. Every one of us has had a beer that we've had to dump, or especially if you're have to deal with these kind of like high level things where you've had a cooler go bad and you have to fix it, and those are the rough days. So we all have this kind of connection, and so we went to Urban Artifact and we had this just amazing strawberry banana sour, and so that kind of got me reinvigorated to the idea of making something with banana. And I actually reached out to their brewer, and we kind of had an email conversation, and he kind of pointed me in the direction of where to source some banana puree. And so that is going to be something in the pipeline. Either strawberry banana. Obviously, we don't want to like steal their idea. And so there are certain things, that are proprietary that brewers don't tell each other, but, if it's like, hey, this is how we did this, a lot of times, we're open and honest with each other. Because I mean, it's not going to be the same beer. No matter, even if we try to mimic it perfectly. But that's something that's going to be really fun. And
Yeah, yeah. Everyone has their own style, so yeah.
yeah, I mean, the base beer is going to be a different style, but an Urban Artifact does an amazing job with sours. I mean, it's kind of all they do. And we've partnered up with Street Side. They do a lot of
Hmm.
fun stuff like we do. And but so that's going to be in the pipeline. And there's probably going to be some other variants of banana beers because we're going to have to buy so much banana puree in order to make it the shipping not exceedingly expensive per pound of puree. So it's the fun stuff that's coming out, but there's always stuff in the works. And you know when the styles change, when obviously we try to be on the forefront of creating new things, but a lot of times there's so many breweries out there. There's so many good breweries out there that we're all kind of coming up with new stuff all the time. And when there's a new style, pastry stouts are a pretty new thing. The slushy sours, the New England IPAs, stuff like
Hmm.
that comes out, and that's what people want. That's the stuff that we're gonna make. And obviously, we still make the light lagers and the stylistic beers that are more traditional. But the fun part is really taking that stuff and figuring out, okay, this is a milk stout. It's pretty good, but how can I make it taste like Snickers candy?
Mm.
And
I like that idea.
so we've
No,
done that. We actually we put Snickers bars in our brown ale, and
okay.
it was called "You're Not You When You're Thirsty."
I love that, and Derek, I appreciate you coming on here and talking all these things because, like I said, you guys do some fun things, and I feel like every place where, or at least hopefully every place that folks are listening to has a brewery near them that does fun, exciting things like you all because it's fun to watch, it's fun to taste them. Whether it's just going to the brewery and doing a little flight of beers, or even getting some cans to go on some of your styles that you do that, I love it, and I'm amazed that a strainer bag like a tea bag is how sometimes it's done. I learned something today.
Yeah. Well, I,
Well,
I very much appreciate you having me on. It's brewing is something that we're all very, all my brewers and I are all very passionate about, and so I love getting the opportunity to kind of share that passion with other people. And a lot of times it's via the beer that we make, and that's something that I think you can tell when you go to a brewery. You can tell what the brewers are passionate about because more than likely it's the best beer that they make. So if the brewers are passionate about making the best, crispest light lager, that's going to be the best beer. And it's not to say that their other beers are bad. It's just to say like that's what they're going to focus on the most. And for me, for a long time, the New England style IPA was like my white whale because we made one and it turned out so well. And then every batch we made subsequent to that seemed to just be not as good. And so I put all my mental capacity towards how to get that style, how to make that style the best way we could. And you had beers coming out of Treehouse and Trillium and Mile Wide and Louisville was making some great ones. They still do. And all these breweries making great ones. And so we just that's you see a lot of those on our board. You see a lot of variations of them because that's what one of the beers that we got passionate about. One
Mhm.
because it was the bane of our existence, but also because there's so much fun stuff you can do with it. And whether it's adding fruit or really the fun thing is how many different hops are coming out on the market that are just really well suited for the style. And so that's that's what makes our job fun is just getting to play with stuff like that. And so, hopefully people see that passion expressed not only in the beer that we make, but also, when we get to have interactions with our customers. And that's the fun thing about being a craft brewery, is that, I get to go out and sit in the tap room and talk with people, and is something that I never take for granted.
Well, and I was going to say, I mean, you talked about it earlier, where it's a little bit of science and art, and that's that side of that creativity, doing different flavors, different types of fruit, different types of hops. That's where you get to be a little bit more of an artist and really shine in my mind.
Yeah, and we as brewers, that's what drives us to keep making beer. I mean, I've been brewing professionally now for a little over 6 years. And one of the things I was always worried about was, am I ever going to lose that passion? I did a lot of research and, read some books about, starting a brewery. And, obviously when I was writing my business plan and through the process. And one of the things that a guy who wrote a book about the subject talked about was, if you're a home brewer, which is what I was, and that's how I kind of got into brewing. Well, that is how I got into brewing. It was a hobby, and it was something that I enjoyed doing. I mean, it was either should I go play golf today or brew beer? It's like I think I'm going to brew beer because at the end of it, I get to drink beer.
Yep.
And so one of the things that it talks about is if you take a hobby and you turn it into something that your livelihood is now depend on, that passion that you had for it might not be there anymore. And so one thing that I was worried about was losing that passion. And, you know, the thing about making a process repeatable is it sometimes kind of turns into something mundane. And so doing those fun beers is what keeps us loving what we do. And I can tell you that, like, every single time we do something outside the box, I'm kind of giddy about getting to taste it.
I was
And, you know,
No, I was gonna say, and it always comes through that you can tell you guys are passionate because the flavors are there, the quality's there, the consistency's there, and to me, that's the sign of folks that are still enjoying their job.
yeah, and we do. And hopefully that doesn't go away anytime soon. And, the pandemic obviously is a rough patch. I mean, we survived, and we, tried to do as best we could, but it was tough. And so I think every brewer in town would tell you that there were times where it was just like, what are we doing this for? It's so much work. But because we have that passion, and we love what we do, I think I can speak for every, brewery in town that we love being a part of the community, and we are all supportive of each other, and we all have that passion. And so we're just going to keep on brewing the best beer we can and having fun while doing it. And hopefully, everyone that gets a chance to come to Lexington and try our beer enjoys it as much as we enjoy making it, and getting to be giddy about tasting all the fun stuff.
Well, Derek, I appreciate you sharing all that with us, and I appreciate you kind of letting us, behind the curtain, so to speak, of the process of everything, and giving us a good lesson, and also just making some damn good beer.
Well, thank you. You know, that's at the end of the day, what we strive to do is just to make the best beer we can, and make sure that the people who are coming in to taste our beer are getting the best quality product that we can offer. And I absolutely, like I said, love getting to do stuff like this and share my passion. Because I think on the podcast we talked about, the last one I did with you, we talked about, what my background is. I went to law school.
Yep.
And dodged a bullet. I could be practicing law right now. Ugh. I mean, I'd be sitting behind a desk, writing some legal brief, or sitting here contemplating how we're going to add 200 pounds of bananas to something. It's a lot more fun.
No doubt about that, and I appreciate it, Derek.
Absolutely. Can't wait to be on again.
Flavorful February is off to a wild start. I really appreciate Derek DeFranco hopping on there to talk a little bit about how they create those wild beers, those really creative beers. Like I said, hopefully you've got a brewery doing that near you, and if not, maybe you can stop by Lexington, Kentucky, and near Twin Brewing to see all the fun things they're doing. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Hop Spirits, all one word. Why? Well, we do a whole bunch of fun stuff, including every Sunday night now our Give It a Try 60-second highlights, where we'll be highlighting a different bourbon, whiskey, beer, or cocktail every week, kind of giving you a breakdown of what to expect so you can see if you want to give it a try. And also, if you haven't yet, you need to sign up for our Drinking Buddies Club. It's our monthly giveaway club. It's free, and it's so simple to sign up. Just go to any of our social media pages at Hop Spirits, all one word, on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Click the link and just sign up. It's free. It takes just a couple minutes, and you could be like Charlie, who won our January giveaway of some amazing beers. But didn't I just say it's a new giveaway every month? Well, it is, and in February we've got an amazing lineup for you all to win. It's 7 different whiskeys, 50 milliliters of each. So you get like a small 350 milliliter bottle to try. So what could you win? How about this? Cascade Moon Edition number 2 small batch, which is at least 16 years old. George Dickel Single Barrel 15-year-old. Barrel Craft Spirits Bourbon 15-year-old lineup. The Barrel Armedia, which is bourbon whiskey finished in brandy, rum, Sicilian Amaro cask. Starlight Distillery's Double Oaked Bourbon. Traverse City Whiskey's Barrel Proof Bourbon. And last but not least, Middle West Spirits Straight Rye Dark Pumpernickel Whiskey. That's right, a plethora of flavors to try, and a whole bunch of different years and ages to try as well. So remember, just sign up for our Drinking Buddies monthly giveaway club. Go to any of our social media, click on the link. It's free. What are you waiting for? Go do it now. And until next time, cheers, everyone.